One more. Here we go. Hi, I'm Amy from Alaska.
And I'm Bobetta from Oklahoma.
But we're probably going to die.
Here in California.
I sure hope so.
Welcome to our podcast, Beside Death Life, where we'll be discussing dealing with death, but from the vantage point of living.
With a dash of humor, because why not?
I mean, why not?
Why not?
Why not?
Well, we took a break. It was Mother's Day, holiday week, whatever. What'd you do, Amy?
Besides get blackout drunk? No, it was an accident. I just had
They always are.
pain, and I just haven't been drinking at all lately. And I just had a little too many cans of champagne. They tasted so good. I was fine. Everything was fine. It was safe. But we had fun. I had a big weekend. But let's talk about our guests.
Yeah. Well, hold on. We're in the future when there are cans of champagne. Speaking of the future, we do have a guest with us that is so in the right now, in the future, Braeden Cohen of LifeSource. I call him the Terramation dude. But aside from in addition to Terramation, Braeden and his company offer so many more dispositions. And that's what we're here to hear about, is everything about LifeSource.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's, I always love educating and sharing my community about sustainable death care because, it's so important to do.
Well, Amy, I know you're very excited to talk to Braeden. You have tons of questions. You are not in this death space that we're in. And it's so fun to talk to somebody that, really is interested in what are our options.
Absolutely. I've been, and tip of the hat to you, Babs, for getting Braeden on here, because I've been very, very curious about this when I've heard about it. Because my first initial, when I read about this, I was almost kind of ooh. But I also, I've been doing just a slight bit of research, and the more I listen, the more I read, I'm like, oh yeah, this is a good thing. Another option is a good thing. And my first question, Braeden, and I don't mean to be so blunt, but how much does it cost for if I planned to do it for me so that it was done and I didn't have kids have to worry about it or whatever.
Yep.
And how much would it cost for me for just the the minimal plan? That's what I want to know.
For Terramation, like human composting. So our price for our Terramation package is $6,750. And at this point in time, because there are no facilities locally within California or locally that we trust, and we can get to that point later, we work with a company in Washington State called Return Home, and they're based in Auburn, Washington. So we also have to factor in the cost of the flight to get you there, which is right now $653. So all said and done, it's $7,403.
Okay. And I probably should have had you explain what it is, but
let's. Yeah,
we can rewind.
I want to go into it knowing how much something like this is going to cost. And
of course, because pricing is actually the number one way that people make decisions based on, for their death care. That's backed up by the National Funeral Directors Association, big nationwide marketing survey. So cost is the number one driving factor in terms of people's decisions at this point in time.
Right, and that makes sense.
Yeah. Because, life is expensive. Dying is historically very expensive. And, we really do our best to position ourselves and offer everything as accessible of a price as possible, while still also being able to pay ourselves and our future employees a living wage. So, because economic sustainability is part of sustainability. But to rewind and just to give a little recap about how Terramation, or human composting, and legally known in the California regulations as natural organic reduction, works, is it works like regular composting. If you're familiar with that, it is a bacterial and eventually fungal driven process. It is the natural process of decomposition, but happens at an accelerated rate because you're optimizing the system to work as best as possible. So everybody is composted in their own vessel. And these vessels, just picture like a big kind of like plastic box. It's 4 feet wide, 4 feet tall, and 8 feet long. And just like when you're doing your backyard composting or composting at a industrial scale facility, you got to balance your carbon and your nitrogen, or your browns and your greens. So the same philosophy for composting in your backyard applies here. You got to balance your carbon and nitrogen, your oxygen levels, and your moisture levels. So the vessel is filled about halfway with a mixture of organic materials, and Return Home uses alfalfa, straw, and wood shavings that they moisten to about 45% moisture.
What do they moisten it with?
Water.
Okay.
Just regular water.
That word moist brings up so many,
and so you're placed in the vessel, and Return Home dresses you in a loosely pressed cotton fiber shroud.
Everything I wear is loosely pressed.
Well, no, this is pressed post, as opposed to woven fiber.
We don't iron anymore. That is so.
No, I steam. I only steam. I do not have the patience to iron and take out an ironing board.
Don't compost me in something tight.
So like imagine just like a super, super loose kind of felt. So like a pressed fabric as opposed to a woven fabric. Woven fabric is too strong. It's not going to break down at the same rate as you and the rest of the material. And it's going to create a really gross like tea bag effect. Nobody wants that. Yeah, nobody wants that. So these shrouds are actually handmade by their funeral director's mom. And it's not woven, it's pressed lightly, so it breaks down at the same rate as the rest of you. So they fill it halfway with organic material. You're placed in there, and then the same mixture of organic material is placed on top of you, so you're fully enveloped. Then the lid is closed, and you're placed on your shelf. The vessel itself, your vessel is connected to an HVAC system. There is no forced aeration. So like sometimes in composting, certain composters use a technology called forced aeration, where they're actually pushing air into the vessel to give it some extra oxygen. But these vessels are passively aerated. There is an intake at the bottom, and just as it heats up because of the decomposition process, the heat rises and it actually draws air from the bottom, so it's flowing through and providing the microbes with the oxygen they need, because composting requires oxygen. There's aerobic decomposition, there's anaerobic decomposition. Anaerobic decomposition is what produces natural gas. That's what you see in those big eggs, or anaerobic digesters. Aerobic decomposition produces compost. So having that airflow and proper oxygen levels is super important.
When you say eggs, what big eggs? Would you see them in the big eggs?
So an anaerobic digester is basically just like a big slurry of like water and organic material. And the giant vessels in which they do this digestion sometimes look like big eggs that are just like supported by frames. Sometimes they look like big silos. It depends on the design. I say eggs because where I grew up in New York, outside of the city. When you drive to Brooklyn, there's an anaerobic digester plant that has these big kind of like shiny eggs. So that's kind of how I think of them in my head. So composting, there's such a massive proliferation of microbes and bacteria that are literally, feeding on you and the organic matter, that it creates heat. And that heat is really important, because that heat is what makes this a safe and hygienic process. Composting is a recognized pathogen reduction process. This was validated back in like the 70s and 80s by the US EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And these standards were originally established to use composting as a way to treat biosolids, which come out of wastewater treatment. So it's highly effective at reducing pathogens. And you have to reach a certain temperature threshold for a certain amount of time. In this kind of in-vessel composting, your temperatures must reach 131 degrees Fahrenheit for a period of 3 days. And throughout that time, yes.
Okay, so
you're raising your hand.
Pathogens with the pathogens, those are like the bad germs that you're wanting to kill.
Yeah. Pathogens are diseases, viruses, bacteria that make people sick.
And so that's because with like a body, when it's decomposing, like normally you'd be like, ooh, that's if they, there's toxins and stuff, right?
I mean, our body is full of fecal coliforms and, different bacteria that could potentially make you sick throughout the decomposition process. Yeah. But the heat and the time and actually the moisture of the composting system is all and the massive proliferation of non-pathogenic microbes outcompete and also reduce the pathogenic ones. So the only diseases in which would prevent you from being composted are prion diseases like Creutzfeldt-Jakob, which is like the human version of mad cow disease, and active Ebola and active tuberculosis. Otherwise, you're good. You could have received radiation treatment, chemotherapy, any other kind of disease. You're fine. It's just the COVID. Yeah.
Okay. Because the temperature comes up and there's so much, it kills.
Exactly.
It kills bad pathogens, but it doesn't kill the other bacteria or whatever it is.
Exactly. Because the bacteria that are doing the decomposition, they thrive in those. So, there's thermophilic bacteria, which a thermophile is an organism that thrives in heat. And so you have different stages of composting. You have the beginning stage, mesophilic, which is kind of lower temperature. And then as the temperature spikes, the population shifts to this thermophilic bacteria. And then as, the bacteria decompose you because you are the food source, that bacterial activity, eventually decreases. And so does the temperature, because the temperature correlates to the bacterial activity. And then, it takes about 30 to 60 days for all of your soft tissues to decompose, your skin, your organs, your fats, your tendons. And what's left is your skeleton and partially, and mostly decomposed organic matter around you. And within that 30 to 60 days, your skeleton has actually aged the equivalent of like 50 years underground.
Whoa,
so because there's just been so much bacterial action, the pH of the decomposing environment is kind of low towards the acidic side, and your bones are soft and partially degraded, but they need some help. So to fully decompose your skeletal remains, you actually have to break them up, and you got to expose the inside to the bacteria. So what they do at Return Home is, first of all, and this kind of gets to what I believe is one of the most important aspects about Terramation and where the ethics really lie, is how and when are you breaking up the skeletal remains? Because I
want you to touch on two anonymity as you can. But this was a really interesting, Amy. I had asked Braeden before. I was like, hey, well, I've looked at all these different companies that do Terramation, and he spoke to very professionally how some don't follow what he considers to be, like you say, ethically done in this piece in particular. So please talk to that.
So the breaking up of the bones to facilitate the full decomposition, in my mind, in Return Home's mind, should only ever be done after your soft tissues have fully been reduced and decomposed. That really maintains the respect and the dignity of the process and also mirrors what happens in other forms of disposition, like cremation and hydrolysis. Nobody is breaking up bones until there's no soft tissue left. Return home takes a two-stage process. They do the first phase where in a big box where they allow your soft tissues to fully decompose. And then they carefully empty out the vessel onto a slow-moving conveyor. And they have people literally hand sorting through the material to remove any medical or cosmetic implants. Or they also allow people to put in keepsakes and memorial items that may not decompose, so they don't want those getting broken up with the remains. And then they send the skeletal remains and the organic material through what a hammer mill is, just a machine that breaks things up. And then they put all of that material in a smaller box that's about 4 by 4 by 4, and they let it sit for 30 days. Over the course of that 30 days, the bone is actually decomposing because the material is still biologically active. The material is physically cooling down because its biological activity is decreasing. And it's stabilizing. And those nutrients are getting locked up in the matrix of the compost, so they're not going to add to nutrient runoff pollution. But back to your question, how do other companies do it? Well, right. What makes Return Home, I think, unique and special is how transparent they are about their process. And they specifically designed a two-stage process where there literally cannot be any reduction of the skeletal remains until the soft tissues have fully decomposed. Other companies use a single vessel system with some kind of built-in mechanism to reduce the bones. Now, these companies are also not transparent. One company I know of because their patent is available online and they have an internal bone auger. The other company, who is more local to me, just does not share any information about their vessel or their process. So if I can't explain to my families and to the general public exactly what is happening when, I'm not going to work with them because I don't have the kind of trust in their process like I do with Return Home. And this has really led me to, develop one of my core beliefs when it comes to death care services is you can't have true consent without full transparency. So, that's true. Yeah. So, and that's really like one of the core values that, I have prescribed to LifeSource and our company and how we approach care is full transparency. Ask me anything. I will always answer your questions with as much or as detail as you're willing to stomach. I mean, So
the other companies that have the internal augers or whatever, that little hammer, do they put them in a container and then do they just wait to a certain point and then do they just smash them or something? Or
no, I mean, so an auger is like a screw that has like cutting edges on it.
I agree with the whole, trying to be transparent and honest, and also that just helps with the anxiety. And because of the industry over the course of time having tricked people and manipulate when you're in this vulnerable place, I mean, I do think it's a very good idea with this new process. It's actually not a new process. It's kind of an old process that's being elevated to be as transparent so that people get it. Because like I said, my initial was, I was kind of like a little bit like, ooh. And then I think in the back of everybody's mind, you're like, okay, what's the scam that they're doing?
Oh, yeah. I didn't think about that. What's the scam?
Oh, there's so many scams in the funeral business, in every business, but in, particular. it is more upsetting in the funeral business when you get scammed or you find out, whatever, your ashes are mixed and, they're sitting on a shelf or whatever, and there's so many. And,
yeah.
And like you and I are saying, I'm comfortable with like, just let me know what you're going to do to me. If they have come up with a new process where they put you in a blender and blend you up and then pour you out, just let us know,
Yeah.
I am about,
just let me know.
I am about saving money.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so your compost, your soil, everyone becomes about 1 cubic yard, 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, several 100 pounds. Not everybody has several hundred.
Like,
so is that like the bed of a pickup truck? That's what I've seen some people
average. Yeah. Yeah.
What do they put the dirt in?
So, you know what bulk sacks are? No. Have you ever seen the big kind of like, it looks like
what a backpack is.
Okay, so for holding and transporting aggregate material like sand or landscape pebbles or compost or soil, you have these big plastic woven bags that have loops and like a pull tie at the top. Those are called bulk sacks. They're either stored in that, or they're put into smaller bags, or that are breathable, and they're returned to the family. The family can accept as much or as little or none of that soil back if they don't want it. The rest is put into a bulk sack, and then it's donated to a conservation forest. So it's going back to nourish the land, to build soil health, to put all that carbon that would have been released into the atmosphere through cremation is stored in the soil. It's put back in the ground. Then it's being used, in the cycle of life to form new life. But so what's the scam? I mean, like, to me, there's really not much at all that so like other funeral homes, the way that people make money, obviously, is through the sale of memorial merchandise. And, oftentimes when you're a traditional brick and mortar funeral home with a really, with a mortgage that you're trying to pay, or you're trying to pay rent on your space or property taxes, whatever, a lot of profit is made in the markup of these memorial products like urns and caskets and jewelry, and other products. But with composting, with NOR, there's really, because you're returning that material to the earth, there's really not a huge opportunity for the sale of memorial items. Other, options that you can provide, you can provide a service to help families plant a memorial tree. You could, sell them a container. Like in the state of California, the only legal option you have for your composted remains is to return it to the earth. California's regulations are actually way more strict than other states. In California, you have to return the compost back to the earth. So it has to be donated and scattered on conservation land. It can be scattered at a cemetery. It can be scattered on someone's private property.
Okay, thank goodness. I was waiting for that, because keep going. Yeah, because
what would be the other options, Braeden? Like in other states, what can you do with this?
So it's more of, the other restrictions would be in California is that, because relate to the definition of scattering and burial. The best place for compost when you're planting a tree is in the root zone of the plant. Compost has microbes, it has nutrients, it has organic matter. All of that ensures your memorial plant and tree will thrive. However, the placement of composted remains in the root zone of a plant, which is beneath the topsoil, rises to the definition of burial. Because the definition of burial, according to public health code, is the placement of human remains beneath the topsoil. And human remains include a body, cremated, hydrolyzed, and composted remains. So you can top dress and use the compost and incorporate it into the topsoil, which is the definition of scattering, which is still beneficial for plants and a tree, but it's not as beneficial as it could be. And in my mind and my vision for LifeSource, I really want to offer people the opportunity to have a more local impact on their local soils and their local communities. Because conservation land is far away from the city. 80% of the population lives in the city center or, the surrounding areas. So.
And you're speaking to Los Angeles in particular.
Yeah. Gosh, what a cutie. So I really wanted to, oh my gosh, such a cute cat.
All right.
I have 3 cats. I love cats. I can,
cats.
So I really wanted to offer people the opportunity to have their last act on Earth be one of environmental and social justice. I wanted to offer people the opportunity to have their composted remains used to plant trees, street trees, in communities.
Street trees.
Yeah, in communities who have less tree coverage, who are experiencing higher temperatures and also greater heat-related fatalities, and also worse air quality. And to nobody, it should be to nobody's surprise that these communities with less tree coverage are also formerly redlined communities. And this is a symptom of historic, systemic, racist development practices.
Isn't everything political?
Everything's political.
Everything's political.
Yeah, including death and dying. So I can't put the compost, at least in LA, or anywhere in California, in the root zone. So that's already kind of a bummer. But in the city of Los Angeles, they don't allow the scattering of any kind of remains on any city property. So that's another barrier. And just like street trees in general are very political. There's a lot of bureaucracy to go through. So I'm hoping that, I can find some other cities in the county and the greater Los Angeles area that would be more amenable to that.
So I have got,
yeah.
I got a couple of questions before you go on.
Sure.
One, and I know you know all this, so you're the perfect person to ask. So here we are with, the West Coast and California in particular, super all about the environment. And here Terramation is probably the most environmentally friendly. And yet it can't be in the root system, which you would think would be something that California would be like, give it to us.
Especially with our droughts. Yeah. And, using compost in plantings, or just using compost in general, is one of the best things you can do to cut back on water use when it comes to landscape maintenance. Compost acts like a sponge. It holds on to water. When you increase the organic matter of soil, you're increasing the water holding capacity. You're also increasing the water infiltration, meaning how much gets absorbed by the ground. So these two things are fantastic for drought-stricken areas. And yet, why does this law exist when it comes to the definition of burial? Well, follow the money. When these laws were written in the 30s and 40s, you had cremation and you had burial. And who stands to benefit from restricting the definition of burial only to cemeteries? Well, it's the cemeteries. So if you control, the only place that you can legally bury human remains of any kind is in a cemetery. So, I don't have actual proof of this, but logically, only the people to benefit most from restricting the definition of burial of cremated remains and composted remains and hydrolyzed remains to a cemetery are the cemeteries and the companies that own them. So, It needs to change in this next year, gearing up to start a campaign to hopefully change that. I need to find, a representative who's willing to sponsor a bill. But I very strongly believe that the definition of burial needs to be changed to exclude composted, cremated, and hydrolyzed remains. Because even cremated and hydrolyzed remains could be used in a beneficial way if you mix it with compost or native soil. You got to dilute it, because alone it's too concentrated with salts, and you could actually damage a plant. But if you dilute it by mixing it with compost or native soil, you could use that to feed a tree or to nourish a garden. So
if you take human remains or any or dog remains that are the cremated,
mm-hmm.
and you sprinkle it around the base of a plant, mm-hmm. That's bad for the plant. That's bad for the plant.
It depends. Depends how large and mature the plant is. And depends how much you put in that one area. It's all about concentration.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, but people have been using bone char and bone meal, ground up bones in general, to fertilize crops and fields for thousands of years. And, it's a wonderful source of phosphorus and calcium, and, which plants need for flowering and producing fruit and for creating strong cells. And, it's not bad if you do it correctly. And for those listening, if you have cremated remains and you want to use them in your garden, mix it with about 3 parts soil or compost. So 3 parts soil or compost to 1 part remains, for 1 part cremated remains. And if you have remains from hydrolysis or aquamation or water cremation, it's like 5 parts compost or soil to 1 part hydrolyzed remains. It tends to be a bit more basic because of the alkaline hydrolysis process.
Mm-hmm. So what was it again? If you have the human remains to mix, you said 3 to 1.
3 to 1 for cremated remains, and 5 to 1 for hydrolyzed remains.
Okay, so say you get like a regular bag like you would of soil at the hardware store, and it's human remains. So my kids get that dirt, the human meal into dirt form now. So they still are going to have to mix it in with soil.
So compost? No. So composted remains, since it's gone through a composting process, you would treat it like regular compost. You would mix it in. You can do half and half. You can do like 80-20. It all depends. So composted remains actually do have a good amount of nutrients in them. They're typically, I would have to look at an analysis, but I seem to recall them being about like 2% nitrogen, which is actually like quite high. Especially for compost. Compost made just from like plant matter typically is around like 0.5% nitrogen. So
I just don't want to have any more steps for my kids to do, because I'll sit.
No, so you could literally just scatter it on the ground and rake it in and incorporate it into the soil. Now, the other thing you can't do, is use composted remains in like a raised bed or a planter, which is so silly.
What?
Yeah, because
go ahead.
Well, it's because the definition of scattering is that it has to be incorporated into the topsoil. And when you're using a raised bed or a planter, that's not incorporated into the topsoil, because topsoil is native soil. So it's like it's so stupid, and that also would rise to the level of permanent storage in a permanent container, which is also not allowed for composted remains. Which I'm like, if somebody wants an urn of composted remains, why not? Why shouldn't they have the ability to do that? It's so silly to restrict them. Why not treat it?
Is there why if you just let it sit around?
The why is that the person who had the most influence on the regulations for California's AB 351, which legalized human composting, kind of, I think, took a bit of a, what's the word I'm looking for? overly restrictive and like
conservative.
I mean, not even conservative. Just like they wanted all the material to go back to the earth. I'm like, I get that, but like nobody's permanently storing 400 pounds of compost. People who want to have like I just think that giving people options is always the best way to do things. Especially,
plant a plant in it and leave it on your desk.
Exactly. We sell these beautiful plant urns made by Boyce Studios. She's up in Lake Arrowhead, and they're absolutely gorgeous. They're like, and why not have a house plant fed by your loved one? Like, why does it have to go back to native soil when like, it's just like, it just makes no sense to me. It's overly restrictive. Like most families are all, aren't even taking all of the compost back. So yes, of course, the rest of that material should go to conservation land, but conservation land is most often inaccessible to most people who live in urban areas and does not benefit the urban and suburban communities who desperately need their soil to be healthier. Healthy soil is at the basis of community health, like flooding and protecting people and locking up toxins. Like I live in Boyle Heights. Our soil has been absolutely trashed by, I forget what battery company it was. And they're going around and, they're removing the heavy metal laden soil and replacing it with other soil, which is great. But like you could also remediate soil with compost application and phytoremediation, which is using plants that take up toxins and then getting rid of them. So like this is like I have friends who are using compost application and phytoremediation to help properties and like the Altadena community recover from the fire. So like this is like compost is so beneficial, and it's really a shame to prevent people from giving back to their community in that way and having their last act be one of like local environmental social justice.
Yeah, and it would be cool like if you had an area. I mean, we need to work on that because it would be cool to have an area in Los Angeles where, it was dedicated to that, and with, even if it's a roundabout, it's
park,
a roundabout
or a park. Sure.
Central.
I would like investing in urban green space is so important. And to me, it is a gift to your community. And, it's then a local accessible place for your friends and family to come and visit and remember you and celebrate you rather than, having your compost shipped off to like the Sierras, which is not accessible to the majority of people in Los Angeles. And like, I love the Sierras. I want to protect them.
Right.
But also, but also the conversation needs to be had about, is it appropriate logically to be applying compost to native soils that are naturally low in organic matter? Like why would you apply compost to like the Los Angeles National Forest, which is not like a traditional forest? It doesn't make sense. You are altering the native soils in such a way that is unnatural. Even though you're applying something that is generally good, why not use the compost locally on people's lawns, on your local green space where you're trying to grow non-native plants like grass and support it that way and help cut back on the amount of watering that you have to do because lawns are incredibly water intensive, and the application of compost, like I said before, helps reduce the amount of water you need to use and keeps your grass greener year round and more resilient and healthier. And, or like maybe the Huntington Library will start allowing people to donate their compost to
Descanso Gardens.
The Los Angeles County like Arboretum, golf courses. If you love golf, why not support your local golf course? If you love a sports team, why not have your compost spread on their field?
I love that.
I mean,
love that.
There's so much opportunity to use this material, that and then the CFB, the Cemetery and Funeral Bureau, which is one of the the regulatory bodies, or it is the regulatory body that regulates this profession. They're like, oh, you have to either have if you are opening up a Terramation facility, you either need to have a contract with a cemetery, actually a cemetery and a conservation organization. But cemeteries produce a lot of soil themselves, and they often have a surplus and don't know what to do with it. And also,
right.
People don't really go to cemeteries. I personally would just be like, why am I donating my compost to a cemetery that is not going to benefit my local community? It's just it seems kind of weird and just I don't know. But scattering gardens are a thing, and I think that's a beautiful way to do it. Although do you think it's a bit hypocritical of me to be like, I don't want my compost used to manage the lawns of a cemetery, but I do want it to be used to manage the lawns of my local park. I don't know.
It's because if you have to do it, that's the thing.
Yes.
It's let me make a choice because this doesn't make sense. Like you said, they already have an abundance of dirt. They just dug it all up and it's there.
Yeah.
And here are these areas that are these urban wastelands where we could use it easily. And it's but how do you make that mind shift? Because we have been controlled with that thought from the cemetery industry for so long. There's this is the right way to do it, And it's
which is so subjective. And, and from, on one hand, I can understand the city's standpoint about it. They're like, oh, we don't want people's remains being scattered on our property because we don't want anybody to maybe push back against the redevelopment or the development of that piece of land because their loved one has been scattered there.
I think in California, I think in California, Amy, you had mentioned on one of our earlier podcasts that in California, if someone dies in their home, even if it's from old age or what have you, it has to be disclosed in the sale.
Yeah,
so I can imagine.
I think in general, that right, and so it would be look, these trees are fertilized with
human remains,
Terramation remains, or however you want to phrase it. That'll just in general freak people out until they get their mind around it. They'll be like, go buy that tree or whatever.
I've literally had this conversation many times. People, bring that up. But at the end of the day, we are all living animals, and we evolved to decompose and return to the soil because that is the cycle of life. Every single cell in our body has been built from nutrients that came from the soil. And with the exception of the seafood that we've eaten, every vegetable and fruit has, grown from nutrients that came from the soil. Every piece of meat has been built from an animal that has eaten some form of plant life. And it all came from the soil, and we're all meant to go back to the soil, whether you are, a believer in evolution and science, or whether you are religious and believe in creationism. It's the same. It is the most biblically literal way to die. In the Old Testament, the Torah, God created man from earth. Yeah. Adam, the name Adam derives from the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth. And we're all meant, dust to dust, to go back to the earth. It's, to me, the most biblically literal form of disposition, even more so than the traditional American burial, which is deeply rooted in Christian practices. And where you're embalmed, most often, you're put inside of a casket, which is metal or lacquered wood. And then that box is placed into the ground inside of another box, the vault or the outer burial container. So there's no connection between you and the earth and the dirt. You're in a box inside of a box.
Yeah. just
and you know what? You're still dead.
Yeah, yeah, it's true. It's true. It's more at that point. It's more for the living / if you believe in the concept of resurrection and everything, like that's why you're buried in hallowed ground. And so, when Jesus comes back and you're supposed to rise and everything, like that's a segment of the population's belief. I don't think that those, laws created around that should have to apply to everybody. And, in Jewish and Muslim burials, you're not embalmed, you're wrapped in just a shroud and or a simple pine casket, with no metal, and there is no outer burial container or vault, and there is connection between you and the earth. And because Judaism and Islam do take a more literal approach to burial and want to help facilitate the return to the earth. Does that mean that those cemeteries are more sustainable? No, it doesn't. Cemeteries themselves are objectively unsustainable.
It's real estate.
It's real estate. You are permanently using land that can only ever be used as a cemetery. And, as population grows, you need more land. You're still using an incredible amount of water to keep those lawns green, an incredible amount of fertilizer, which is incredibly energy intensive to produce. Most fertilizer is produced from fossil fuels like natural gas. And you're also using pesticides and herbicides, which are poisoning your communities. So there is a more sustainable alternative, which is green burial or natural burial. But again, that still gets back to permanent land use. And you have your hybrid cemeteries, which are, you have traditional cemeteries that sometimes have sections that are dedicated to green burial, which is great. And in green burial, there's no embalming, there's no vault. You're wrapped in a shroud, or you're placed, or you use a biodegradable casket made from natural materials like bamboo or mycelium, mushrooms, or woven willow. So, it'll eventually break down, just in a much slower timeline. And depending on where you're buried, you might never actually decompose just based on the conditions of the soil. Like, say Joshua Tree Memorial Park, which is a beautiful natural burial section within a cemetery. Joshua Tree is in the desert. Deserts are not known for their natural decomposition and biologically active soil.
No.
You're probably just going to desiccate and dry out and kind of and mummify, but that's okay. That's natural. And the areas are not maintained like lawns. They're left natural. And then you also have something called conservation natural burial, which is actually a wonderful tool and use of zoning laws to create, to protect natural land and keep it wild through the act of burial. Because once you bury someone on a property, it can only ever be a cemetery and you can't develop it. So as long as you're keeping that land wild and natural, you're supporting a natural native ecosystem, and family can still come visit you and spend time there. It helps bring people to nature and connect them with nature. Hopefully that they form a more meaningful relationship with it, and maybe just being in nature is important for our mental health, for helping people realize that climate change is real and that we need to protect our environment. So in that sense, conservation natural burial is also an incredibly sustainable form of disposition, but it's just less accessible because it's usually far away. And again, accessibility. 80% of the population lives in urban centers. Not everybody can afford to, say, go up to Creston for a natural burial, which, is still going to cost you, depending on whether you want to have a ceremony and a graveside service, between $11,000 and $15,000, all said and done.
Wow. Yeah.
I don't have enough to die.
That's for like rich people that want to be up there, and then you can go up there and visit them or whatnot. So just so
stop by Paso Robles, get some wine,
Get some wine.
If I wanted to be buried in my own lot next to my house,
you can't.
That I own.
California. There are other states you can, but not here.
Yeah. Okay. I do have a question too, back to in the process of the terramation. When you say there's like air comes in through the bottom and then goes out to the top.
Yeah. Where does it go?
Out through the top. Where does it
go?
Yeah. So at return home, it gets fed to what's called a biofilter. And a biofilter is a big container full of moist wood chips, and it's biologically active. And the microbes in the wood chips are actually consuming, because odors are volatile organic compounds, VOCs. Those are regulated by our air board. And those odor compounds that are trapped in the moist air that's coming off of the composting vessel cling to the wood chips, and the microbes literally consume them. So it acts as a big sponge and filter for any odor compounds that are being produced. When you're composting appropriately and you are truly facilitating an aerobic process, the odor compounds are not bad. It'll smell like moist dirt,
fertilizer,
maybe
not
necessarily
but dirt,
like earth,
like earth,
and you might have a bit of a tobacco-y sweet smell depending on what you're composting. But when the system shifts to an anaerobic composting process, which you're always trying to avoid, it's the anaerobic composting process that produces the gross smells, like the smells that smell like vomit or decay or feces, putrescine, which is
something
the
dead.
Vomit compound. Yes, something dead.
Compound. That's the vomit compound.
Putrescine. No, that's a decomposing one. But there is so one of my favorite fun facts is that, the smell of Parmesan cheese is also the same odor compound that's in vomit.
Gross. I love
Parmesan. I do too. But, it's one of those odors. And, so that's why the composting process is, especially with NOR, is very much controlled. That's why you do things like rotate the vessel or supply air, manage the moisture, because you're always trying to balance moisture and airflow. And so when you turn the vessel, you're redistributing the material, you're redistributing the moisture, and you're reestablishing the pockets of air in the material to allow for air to flow. Because, what does moisture do in a vessel? It settles. Especially at the beginning of the process, there's just a rapid liquidization of all your fat. And when that fat goes to the bottom, you could block the airflow. And when you block the airflow, you lose the oxygen and the system goes anaerobic. So what do? You turn it. You redistribute the material and you redistribute the moisture and you reform those air pockets so it can maintain its aerobic oxygen-rich environment.
Can you hear people flopping around in there when it's turning?
I love you, Amy. That's why I have you.
It's a good question. I have not actually been present for when they have been turning it, but I don't think so, because they only leave about 4 to 6 inches of space at the top. Otherwise, you're fully enveloped in this organic material. So it's not like you're going to totally flow through it. And so yeah, but that is a good question. And I don't really have an answer because, like I said, I haven't been there while they've turned a vessel with a person inside of it.
But you have been there for most of the other process. Have you been there when you say they dig through the bones to see their fillings or?
I actually haven't witnessed those processes happen in front of me. But Return Home they give tours. I've been on 3 tours of their facility so far. They host a convention called TerraCon every year. It's the Human Composting Conference, and holding true to their belief of full transparency, they give people tours of the entire facility. They show them the vessels, their post-processing system. But yeah, so I'm sure if I asked, they would allow it. But I just haven't had the opportunity to be there while they're doing that. And it's probably also a liability thing. I'm not covered under their liability insurance, but their employees are.
Someone being in the back of the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we're closing in on our hour, and I feel like there's still so many questions and so many things that we could continue. Yeah, we can. We could do a part 2. Also, in that part 2, I kind of want to follow you or like catch up with you again as you work on this, finding someone to support a bill for. I really love your interest and passion, as we can all clearly hear and see, that you have to reincorporate, or not even bring the people back into the city, to help the city flourish. You look at places. Exactly. I'm in Orange County now, but I was in LA forever. And Orange County is just like covered with outdoor spaces, parks and so forth. And it's incredible because people use them and the air is cleaner down here and so many things. But you even look at a city like New York City that has also lots of green dedicated space in a very dense and populated city, and how important that is to a city, like getting outside and how cool would it be that, yes, if you can bring your loved ones into that cycle in the city, how cool. Because here I'm thinking like, oh, well, what state do I have to go to, to either be buried naturally or on my own property, or to become a tree?
Colorado.
Or what have you. Yeah, Colorado. And Oklahoma.
Basically all of the other states who have legalized natural or organic reduction allow people to use the composted remains to plant trees or bury it somewhere.
We need to start to communicate and let people know and make it work like this. Not a freaky thing. This is not
No.
This is like
no. And Amy, you really said it before. Education is the best way to combat fear and anxiety about anything, but especially this new form of disposition. Because if you practice transparency and just give people all of the information they need to be comfortable, then they're going to be comfortable with it. And maybe they won't. And that's okay. That's why we have options. They don't need Terramation is not the only thing. They could still be buried traditionally. Maybe natural burial is more their speed. Maybe they want to be cremated or hydrolyzed or buried at sea. Like, those are all the options that you have in the state of California. So we truly practice like a judgment-free approach to funeral services. We're here to do what the people want. We're here to educate people so they have all the information they need to make the decision that's right for them or for their loved one. We still offer traditional services like traditional burial and embalming and flame cremation. And we also offer terramation and full body burial at sea and green burial and hydrolysis, these more environmentally friendly alternative forms of disposition. So, we're just here to serve, basically, in the best way possible.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, kids. Yes, we have to do a part 2. We're going to follow you through your urban rejuvenation. But this has been Braeden Cohen with LifeSource, which is a funerary company based out of Los Angeles, also serving Orange County. And is there another county?
Riverside, San Bernardino, Ventura.
Okay.
The 5 area.
The 5. And just because we talked about Terramation for this entire thing, because it's so new, it's so cool, and you're so such a rich resource of
it's
knowledge.
It's my personal favorite, 14 years in the composting industry, naturally I gravitate towards this. But
I love it.
My second choice would be burial at sea, though.
Okay. Go ahead. That'll be our closing "Who is Braeden" statement. Why would that be your second choice?
I mean, I love seafood, and I think it's only fair, like I just think it's so cool just to like nourish marine life and have crabs and shrimp consume my body when I'm dead.
I just saw some like sea pots or something. That's a thing that you put maybe the remains into this. I don't know if it's clay or what the material is, and then you drop
like conservation reefs. Yeah. So you can incorporate cremated or hydrolyzed remains into cement structures, and then they can be placed in reefs, and that can be used to help restore reefs.
What about when you just scatter cremated remains into the ocean? I mean, does that have any? I mean, they're already said. I mean, that's an okay? And
absolutely. That's a very common practice. We help a lot of people do that.
But I mean, it's not something where it's like you have to do it in secret or something like that. I mean, if you want to just
there are some guidelines in which you got to follow. You got to be 500 yards off the shore, and you do technically have to file a disposition permit saying that I am being scattered at sea. And you can charter a boat, you can get on a kayak or a rowboat, do it yourself. But no, it's a very popular choice. And
so not like in the Big Lebowski.
We can't do a Viking funeral.
Viking funerals, first of all, not only are they not legal, they're not historically accurate at all. That never happened.
That's always what I wanted to do. Dang it.
I know. My stylist jokes with her kids, like you got to practice your archery because I want a Viking funeral.
Your archery. I love it. Oh my God. Okay. There will be a part 2. Thank you guys, both of you, for showing up and doing this.
Thank you for having me.
Signing off, and we'll see you next time. Bye, guys.
Thanks,